I won't forget what it was like when he gave me life. I was dead in my sins, hopeless, any dream of life crushed. In the grip of darkness, without any true source of light. I don't know why he chose me when I had nothing to offer him. But that's who he is. His love flowed through my soul. He said, "Awake, awake." And it's no longer I who live, but he, the glorious one, life itself, Christ Jesus, who brought me back to life.
Well, welcome to church this year in 2024. We're starting the year off right, okay? So that's good. And I want to welcome everybody online. If you're joining us online, we're so glad that you're here and joining us that way. New Year's resolutions, right? Yeah, all of us are aware of those. Anybody ever do those? I mean, I've done them a lot in my past, and even this year. Did you know that 44% of Americans, they do them every year? That's kind of, on a poll. About half, a little less than half of everybody does New Year's resolutions. 31% of those people stick with them. And that number actually was a lot higher than what I would have imagined. 31 to a third, because I thought, man, it would be a lot less than that. But if they do fail, 81% fail by when? What do you think? February. Now, the four most popular types of New Year's resolutions are exercise, right? Eat well, lose weight. All those are kind of related. Those are the top three, right? So it's all to do with our bodies. And then save money. That was the fourth one. I didn't know this, but the second Friday in January, so this Friday upcoming, is called Quitter's Day because it's the most likely day for people to give up on their resolutions. So if you make it past Friday, hey, win. You're already doing better than most. But the reason that we do New Year's resolutions is what? There's something off. There's something wrong. There's something that needs to be changed, right? That's the whole reason why we do them in the first place. Let me ask you a question, and let's just get into it. How many of us feel we need to change something spiritually this year? Yeah, I think, let me raise my hand. Like all of us, right? All of us. Every single one of us has something in us that could do better or do different. Every single one of us has felt that. Even if you've never followed Jesus in your whole life, all people at some point, they think about God. At some point, we all at least think about God. That, is there a God out there? Is he aware of who I am? And should I submit to him? We all have a conscience in us that tells us something is out there. We can all look at creation and look out there and say, okay, something, this didn't just come from nothing. It didn't just appear, right? We all have that. Even if you have given your life to Jesus, you feel this tug of war between living for the world and living for Jesus. We all feel that. Maybe we feel that we found a balance there, but sometimes times like these, at the new year, these times they gnaw on us. They gnaw on our spirit, and we know deep down that, no, we don't have a good balance. there are plenty of people who are not perfect, but they are in good relationship with God. And they seek him, they listen to him, they do what he says, and they love other people in his name. That's awesome. That's great. So if you're there, awesome. There are plenty of people that struggle in their faith. They believe in Jesus, they love Jesus, but their actions don't always line up with that. And there are moments where we open our Bibles. There are moments where we listen to God. There are moments where we try to do what he says. But it's more moments than consistency. We want it to be, but the demands on our time and the lack of true conviction steal away any shot of really following through on what we believe. Plenty of people that once had a strong faith, but now it's just kind of a faint heartbeat. Have you ever been there? Right? Where you can look back into a time in your life where, man, you were going strong, but now it's not so much. We've either forgot him because of the busyness of life, or we've left him because we were upset that he didn't intervene in our pain. So the question for all of us is this: how do we come back to life again in our faith? I think it's a great series to start the new year. How do we come back to life again in our faith? Now, you guys know that the New Testament starts with the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and things were dead. They were absolutely dead. God had not spoken to his people in 400 years, not said a word. He hadn't raised up a prophet. He hadn't done anything for 400 years. They had been in a cycle of sin. We remember that from the Judges. The kings got progressively worse and worse. They had a civil war and the nation broke apart. And eventually the northern kingdom was conquered and deported and never heard from again. The southern kingdom was also conquered. They were deported, but then later they got to return. The nation was absolutely tattered. And the last word we got from God was in the last book of the Old Testament, both the last one and chronologically too, Malachi. And he says this, he gives them hope, and he says this is the last words of God. Look, I am sending my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. Do you guys remember who he's talking about? John the Baptist. He's talking about John the Baptist, and he's saying, I'm coming. I'm on the way. And that's the last word that we get. And so people are probably what? They're probably hopeful and excited, looking for that. But nothing happens. They died, and it didn't happen. And then their children died, and it didn't happen. And then for 400 years, nothing happened. And you got to imagine what the disciples, before they were disciples, what they were living in. They were probably like a lot of the Jews of that time, that they were just spiritually exhausted and dead. And their religion had become nothing more than just about knowing the right things and about following the rules. That's all it had become. And so it was a spiritually dead situation. So no wonder why there was such a reaction whenever Jesus showed up doing miraculous things, right? And teaching in ways that they had never heard before. All of a sudden, their antennas are going up, and they're listening because they're excited. Wait, this is different. For the last 400 years, it had not been this way. And all of a sudden now you got a guy who's doing it different, who's doing things that they'd never seen before. And he goes and he preaches a sermon on the side of a mountain. And we've named it creatively the Sermon on the Mount. And these words brought many people back to life. And Jesus went up and he taught what is known as the Sermon on the Mount. And at the very end of the sermon, he says this. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 and 25, he says this. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine. He had just preached the whole sermon. And he says, therefore, what are you going to do about what you know? right? What are you going to do with what you know? He says, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Jesus knew that what we do is more important than what we know. He explained that a house built on a firm, solid foundation can withstand the storms. And we know a thing or two about storms around here. I cannot wait till the springtime. I want to be the guy up on my roof waiting for those tornadoes. Okay, I love it. Up in Indiana, it's bland. There's no storms. If they get any wind, they're freaking out. They don't know what a storm is, okay? Us Oklahomans, we hear those sirens. It's a signal to what? Go outside and go look in the sky. That's what we do. And he says that if you do what he says, if you put to action what you know, that will put your faith on a firm foundation. He talks about it as a house that you build, a house that you live in, right? It's the same with our faith. It's the same with our faith. What we do with what we know. And he makes a distinction between those who just hear the words and those who put action to the words. It's the knowing and the doing that create a firm foundation. Knowing is important, right? Knowing is important. We've all seen it where somebody didn't know the right scriptures. They didn't know the right theology, and it messed their life up. We know the importance of theology, but it can't stop there. It can't stop with just knowing. It's got to move into action. Right knowledge without obedience leads to a dead faith. What do we do with the knowledge that we have? I'll never forget a kid named Josh Flanagan. Back when I was growing up in Texoma, we went to CIY. Our high schoolers are going to CIY this summer, looking forward to that. CIY changed my life, and it was something that I look forward to every summer. One particular year, we had a group of guys that was really into pranks, okay? Now, as a youth pastor, I always told the group, no pranks, okay? None, because you're going to hurt somebody's feelings or you're going to hurt their property, okay? And either one is going to get you sent home. No pranks. We're going to have plenty of fun without the pranks, okay? Just I would tell them, no pranks. But when I was a kid, we pranked. And so we had a group that was especially into it. And one year we found out, or we had this idea that we had heard about. And if you double bag a big, 55-gallon trash bag, whatever, and you fill it halfway with shaving cream, okay? And then you take the lips of that trash bags and you put it under the dorm door. And then you take a board and you lay it over that bag and you stomp on that thing. It just super speeds the shaving cream under the door and just destroys the room. I mean, destroys it. And so we thought, well, let's test this out. We had a room that nobody was staying in that year. And so I went into the room and I tipped over a desk so I could be shielded like, what was the movie Oppenheimer or something like that, where they're shielded, right, from the nuclear blast. Well, that's what I did. I got down and I sat there and sure enough, they did it and they stomped on this thing and it just destroyed there's shaving cream everywhere. The only place there wasn't shaving cream was in the outline of the desk that was in front of the wall. So they got super excited and they wanted to do it for real to somebody. Well, there was one kid in our group that was already asleep. So it was Josh Flanagan. And so it was not that they didn't like the kid. It wasn't that they had something against him. He was just the one that was asleep. And so they started in and they got 2 more trash bags. They filled it up and they started going. They put the lips of the trash bag under the door and Josh woke up. And Josh, he was a pretty quiet kid. But he had been in a small group with a different youth group earlier that day with a different youth pastor. And they were talking about this very prank. He had heard about it separately. And so he saw that trash can or the trash bag coming up underneath his door. So he got out of bed, walked over there. He didn't open the door and say, like, nice try. He just went over there and he tied a knot in the bag. They didn't know. And they're like, shh, be quiet. Here we go. And so they put that board there. And when they stomped on that board, they just got blasted all over themselves. And the shaving cream all over them, the walls of the hallway. It was amazing. And Josh, he just went back to bed. It's what you do with the knowledge that you have makes all the difference. Not what you know, it's what you do with that. Our actions can bring us back to life. Listen, if you're stuck in this spot where you don't feel connected to God, where you feel that you're struggling with your relationship, many times it's doing the things that we already know to be true. The doing comes before the feeling. Have you ever noticed that? It's the action that comes before the feeling. We put into action before we feel. The feelings will follow. And this is clearly the point. And John, I want you to open your Bibles to John 3 and 4. Because what John is going to do here is he's going to compare and contrast two people that are total opposites. Both don't know, then they're taught, and then what they do with what they know is the point. John chapter 3 first, a guy named Nicodemus. Look in John chapter 3, verse 1. Now there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who is a member of the Jewish ruling council. This is a big deal. All right, you may know that there's only 70 members of this Jewish ruling council. It's like a Senate, basically. In the whole nation, there's only 70 men. And he's one of those 70, okay? Very important guy here. Verse 2, he came to Jesus when? At night. That's going to be important. He came to Jesus at night and said, Rabbi, we know that you're a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs that you're doing if God were not with him. See, he's one of those guys. He's one of the Pharisees who was really having trouble with Jesus, but at least he was softened to Jesus. He was asking questions. He just wasn't prepared to ask them in the daylight. And so he wanted to come to Jesus in the cover of darkness. Nicodemus, he respects Jesus, but he doesn't submit to him. And that's the difference, because to submit to Jesus means we got to do what he says. We got to do what he says. Respecting Jesus means you can admire him, you can root for him, you can cheer him on from a distance. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do what they say. You can praise him, but not submit to him. Submitting to Jesus means you're going to live the way Jesus lived. That's the difference there. And Jesus starts to teach him that he must be born again. You remember this conversation? He said, Nicodemus, you got to be born again to enter the kingdom of heaven. Nicodemus is confused by this. He's asking questions. And Jesus' response there in verse 10, he says this, you are Israel's teacher. He's like, you're the guy. You're the top dog here. And he says, and you don't understand these things? Nicodemus did not understand, and that's going to be important. He did not know, and that's going to be important. So hold on to that. Let's jump to John chapter 4 now. You got the woman at the well story. And John puts them side by side to make a comparison. Nicodemus was an important guy. This woman at the well was very unimportant. Nicodemus was a man. The woman at the well was she was a woman. Nicodemus was a Jew. This woman was a Samaritan, a half-Jew despised by the Jews. Nicodemus was educated. The woman was uneducated. Nicodemus was moral. The woman was immoral, as we're going to see. Nicodemus was named in the story. We know his name, Nicodemus. The woman at the well, we never get her name. And the story basically goes like this, that Jesus was traveling through Samaria, and he came to the well at noon, and she is there and drawing water, and Jesus has a conversation with her, asking her for a drink. She's drawing water, so he says, hey, can I have a drink? And she makes a snarky reply, and Jesus said, look, if you knew who was talking to you, you would ask for living water. And then so she's like, she makes another apparently snarky reply, and is like, okay, yeah, give me some of that. And he talks about water that you'll never go thirsty again. She's like, yeah, okay, yeah, give me that, dude. And he says, oh, okay, go get your husband, and then I'll give it to you. And she's like, well, I don't have a husband. And he goes, you're right. You've had 5. And the guy you're living with now is not even your husband. Whoa. She says, oh my gosh. She's floored. How could he know all that? And she immediately presses into a theological discussion, and she starts by asking a geographical question. Because she wanted to know, is it right to worship God in Jerusalem or in Samaria? This was all the whole thing. The Samaritans had tried to say that it was actually on their mountain that God came, and Jesus presses in. And he says in John 4:22, he says, you Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation comes from the Jews. So he tells her straight. He gives her the truth. But look at what it says. That he said, you don't know what you're talking about. Go back to Nicodemus. He says, you don't know what you're talking about. But then to both of them, he educates both of them. And he begins to tell each of them what is true. And he teaches them. But here's where the two stories split. What did they do with that knowledge? Which one of them responded? Now, we know that Nicodemus was very careful about following Jesus. He shows up 2 more times in the scriptures in John. He shows up in John 7 when the Pharisees, they're raging mad about Jesus. And they want to arrest him right there and get it over with. And he helps pump the brakes a little bit. And he says, guys, maybe we should hear him out first. And he did not get a high five for that conversation. They were like, well, what are you, a follower of him too? Like, get out of here, Nicodemus. And then we see him one more time in John 19 when he shows up with another secret disciple or another secret follower named Joseph. And those 2 guys take Jesus off the cross. Now, it was a bold move to do this because some people might have seen him do it. But it was calculated and cautious. Now, I personally believe, this is just me, that Nicodemus did come to faith. I think we're going to see him in heaven. I think so. And I think that after the resurrection, he came to be a bold, out loud follower of Christ. That's what I think. But that's just a guess. Okay, I'm just seeing the trajectory here. But John never says that. He never tells us that he ever responded, that he ever did anything about what he knew. But the woman is different. In John 4:25, look at that. John 4:25, it said, the woman said, she's talking back to Jesus, I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I, the one who's speaking to you, I am he. It was the first time that Jesus explicitly told anybody his true identity. And it would be the last time he would tell anybody for 2 more years until Peter would declare him the Messiah. He started by telling this woman at a well at noon in Samaria, and he wouldn't tell anybody again for 2 more years. But what does she do with the knowledge she just acquired? He's the Messiah. What does she do? John 4:28. Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. And they're probably thinking, oh, that's a lot. That must have took a while. Could this be the Messiah. And do you know what happened next? The woman who we never knew the name of changed the eternal trajectories of the people in that whole town. Because look what happens. What did they do now with the knowledge that they had? Look, in 4:30, it says, they came out of the town and made their way toward him. They responded to her response. So they came out. And they didn't just go hear him. Look in verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. I want to say to us today, as we begin this new year, leave the water jar. Leave the water jar, which means readjust our priorities. That's what it means. She was there at the well to do what? To get water and not to leave it there. She was there to bring it back, to take it to her house. She had something to do. But when she knew that the Messiah was standing in front of her, everything changed. Her priorities changed. In a second, they changed. And she left that for something more important. What do you think the woman at the well felt that night when she laid her head down to sleep? She felt alive. For probably the first time in a long time, she felt important. She felt like she had purpose. She felt like she had done something important. Not only because she had met Jesus, but because she had helped to transform a town. And you remember, she was at the well at noon. Do you guys remember that part of the story? She was at the well at noon. You know why? I mean, it's extremely hot at noon. Nobody would want to go and draw water and carry that big jar of water back on your head to town at noon. She was there because nobody else was there at that time. And that was the point. No doubt she was either not welcome there because of her history and her past and what she had done. She was either not welcome there or she didn't feel comfortable being there. Either way, she wanted to be there when nobody else was there. But after this day, a day that she came back to life and brought a whole town back to life, where do you think she was at 8 a.m. that next morning? I think she was probably at the well. Because not only had she come back to life, but she had helped to transform all those other people in that town. And I've got to believe that they welcomed her and she felt welcome. It changed. What she did changed things. Put what you know into action. This woman didn't wait until she had a free minute. She didn't say, okay, well, I'm obviously busy here. I'll tell people about you later. She didn't hesitate because she was obviously unqualified to be telling people about Jesus. She didn't hold back because she was scared that nobody would listen to her. What she knew translated into action, and she did it that day. What is our water jar? What is it that holds us back? What is it that we need to leave and set down? Let's set down the jar of later. We think we're so busy that it's not a good time right now. We'll definitely think about it more later. We'll definitely get to it. But right now, things are really crazy in my life. I mean, every Saturday, I've got 3 kids that all play sports. I've got a busy job that's keeping me there late at night. I've got to get up early. I've got to do this. I've got, hey, I'm busy too, right? I get it. I get it, right? But here's the thing. Two things about that. My favorite people to ask into ministry, into doing what we're doing here at the church and doing what we're trying to do for this town. My favorite people to ask to help join and volunteer in them are busy people. You know why? Because those are the people that get things done. I love asking busy people. But here's the second part of that. We don't need to separate our busy schedules with what we're doing for Christ. No. Let's take Jesus into our busy schedules. Man, if you're coaching a team, man, find a way to be an influence on those kids and those parents. Man, if you're busy at work, man, find a way to be a light for Christ there. Whatever you're doing, find a way to influence people with what you're doing. Are you driving a lot? Have a list of people that you're praying for. Right? Use those relationships that you have, that you're busy with, to do something that you know. Leave the jar of later, but leave the jar of disqualification as well. Man, you might think that you're not qualified to put yourself out there for Jesus, that people know you. They know your shortcomings. They know who you are. Here's the difference between you and them. They just pretend better than you. That's it. There ain't one person who don't have struggles. There ain't one person who don't have awful thoughts going on in their head. There's not one person who doesn't have shameful sin in their life. And you're not qualified to do something for Jesus because you did something in your past. No. You're qualified to do something because of what Jesus did. You are qualified because Jesus makes you qualified. Look at the woman at the well. She had known Jesus for like 2 seconds. She didn't go to a Bible study. She didn't learn the theologies of the Bible. She didn't give anything to the church yet. She didn't have a perfect attendance record on Sunday mornings. She didn't do anything of that nature. She wasn't qualified, right? No, she was qualified because she had met the Messiah and she had put her faith in him. Listen, leave the jar of disqualification and then leave the jar of laziness. That one's a big one. The jar of laziness. This is not a game. This is not a good idea. Jesus has a call on your life. The choice that the woman had at the well is the same choice that we have right now. The choice to respond and to do something about what we now know. You are at the well right now. And what you do right now will determine the rest of your life, the rest of your eternity, and the rest of eternity for others around you, perhaps. There is one thing that you do not want to be lazy about, and it's this. So come back to life. Here's what leaving the water jar does for you if you're feeling spiritually dead. It gives you purpose again. You have a neighbor that needs you right now. You probably have a neighbor that needs you right now, unless you live out in the boonies. You have a neighbor that needs you right now. You have a coworker that needs you right now. That they are sitting next to you, they're working next to you, elbow to elbow, and they definitely need to know what you know. They are in danger of hell. They don't know it, but you know it. What are you going to do? You have a friend at school that desperately needs you to bring them to youth group. Did you know that the statistics show that if a student does not accept Christ, by the time they walk across the stage, shake hands with the superintendent, and get the diploma in their hand, the chances of them ever finding the Lord go way down. The best time to reach somebody is when they are in middle school and high school, when they are little kids. That's the best time to reach somebody. And do you know who the best people to reach those kids are? Other students. When I walk into a school, it's kind of creepy sometimes. But you, if you're in middle school, if you're in high school, if you're in elementary school, you have permission to go in there and invite them to church, invite them to youth group, talk about your faith. You have a coworker that needs Jesus. You have a neighbor. You have a friend. And let me tell you something. Maybe you know and maybe you don't know. You can do this. If you had any doubts, just look at the woman at the well. She put the jar down and she ran into town. Do you think that on her way into town, she stopped running and she said, what am I doing? What am I doing? People aren't going to listen to me. I've made a mess of my life. I have no moral right to be speaking to anybody about their faith. Well, she may have, but we know that she started again because we know she made it to town and she spoke the words of life. And we're still talking about her to this day. Look, we all have plenty of reasons why we can't do it right now. We hold our water jug and we say, we can't talk to them right now. We can't pray for them right now. We can't invite them right now. We can't serve on a ministry team right now. We can't. Not right now, at least. Later we'll do it. But I want to say, if not now, then when? No, look, Jesus didn't wait on us. While we were still sinners, Jesus died for us. He rescued us, and he didn't wait until we were ready, until we had a clearing in our calendar, until we had a better training, better understanding. Put the water jar down. Hear these words of Jesus and put them into practice. It will bring you back to life, and it might just bring somebody back to life around you. You know that story I told you about Josh Flanagan tying up that trash bag? I never forgot it. And what I didn't say was why he was alone in that room. He was the most unlikely kid ever to have done that. He was in that room alone because he was not a very popular kid. He was a quiet kid that didn't talk much or make himself loud in any way. And when he tied it up, he just went back to bed while those other guys stood covered in their shaving cream outside the door. He was an unlikely person to ever have done something like that. We are all unlikely people. But God has called us to do something that really matters. And there's one thing that I know, that you are at the well. And you know in your heart of hearts that Jesus is what he says he is. And that you know that he has a call on your life. And the only question that confronts you right now is this: will you leave what holds you back and do what matters? Because if you do, you'll be brought back to life. And someone else who needs you might be brought back to life as well.